Welcome back to Neuroconvergent Leadership, where we talk about effective communication with people who are neurodivergent or people who are just neuro different than you are. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I love helping great engineers become great leaders. Have you ever wondered why some stories are a hit and some just bomb? I recently listened to 10 stories in a row, 5 minutes apiece, and I learned quite a bit, so let's discuss. I have often talked about the power of storytelling, and we've discussed it in a number of episodes, including episode 12 with Paul Smith. He talks about the structure of storytelling. Episode 42 with Trent Theroux, where he talks about 1-minute stories and what components make up a good one. In episode 34, it was me talking about how you can use hooks to get people's attention. And in episode 47, I share some of the science behind why storytelling is so effective. So last night I went to my first Moth Storytelling event. Basically, it's an event where around 300 people went, and if you wanted to tell a story, you could write your name on a slip and put it into a hat. And if your slip was pulled, then you got to tell your 5-minute story. The theme was lost. The rules are basically your talk has to relate to the theme. It has to be around 5 minutes. So at 5 minutes, they would blow a harmonica quite nicely. At 6 minutes, they blew it a little bit more aggressively, and we're telling you, you got to finish up. It's got to be a true story, and nothing can be in writing. And it is not to be memorized. It's to be told like you would tell a story. There were only 10 speakers, and 25 of us put our names in the hat to get up and speak. And the way it happens is they pull the names out of the hat one at a time. They don't pull all 10, so the whole time you don't know if you're going at all, if you're going next or at a later time. So basically, I was on the edge of my seat 10 different times, wondering if it was going to be my name that got pulled, and it never got pulled. So that was kind of disappointing, but I did learn quite a bit from the experience, both from preparing my talk and from then observing other people's talks back to back to back. And when you have written your own talk, it helps you pay a little bit more attention to their talks because you compare. You see how they did things different than you would have done it, how they, interpreted the theme, that sort of thing. So it was a very great learning experience. And on the way up, I went with my friend Peter George. You can listen to him, episode 14, where he talks about public speaking. He asked me what I was going to talk about. I gave him a quick overview, and he challenged me. He said, how about if you take everything in your story and you tell it from the present tense, even though everything happened in the past? And I thought about it, and I asked him why, and he said, when you tell a story in the present tense, it engages the audience more. So I thought this was fun. We were early. I had time. So I rethought the presentation in a way that I could tell it all from the present tense. And it really made a big difference. Think of the difference between these two sentences. I was at the beach, the sun was high, and the sand was burning my feet. It's factual, it's descriptive, and it lets you understand everything, but it doesn't make you live it. Versus, there I am hopping along the beach, trying to keep the scorching hot sand from burning my feet from below while the high sun is burning my head from above. Telling it in the present tense just did two different things. One, rather than you observing a story from the outside, when I tell it from the present, you're kind of living it with me. You're sort of in the story. By retelling it in the present tense, I automatically changed the way I described it. It became less academic and less about the facts and more about how I was feeling at the time. And the emotions are going to draw people in a lot more than the facts of the situation really would. So once I made that change myself, I then paid a lot of attention to how other people told stories. Almost everyone told them from the past. Around 3 people told from the present. They told it as if they were speaking in the present, but they tended to float in and out of present and past tenses. Now, if I were reading, I would definitely have noticed that. But in listening to people, it turns out we do it all the time, and I never would have noticed. But one thing I did notice is that when they were telling it in the present tense, it was definitely more compelling. So That's one thing that I learned when I'm telling stories going forward. I will be telling them in the present tense because it A, makes my descriptions more emotionally involved, and it just helps draw the listener in. I had a few other observations. The theme was lost, and that's pretty open to interpretation. Some people talked about being lost navigationally. They couldn't find where they're going. Mine was going to be about feeling emotionally lost and not knowing which way to go. It could be about having lost a bet. It can be about having lost an item. It can be about the television show Lost, which is pretty interesting because when there's a theme, you can interpret it kind of however you want to. And if you're ever put on the spot to tell a story about something, think about how loosely you can interpret that and how you can shift it to a story that's more comfortable for you. If you ever watch politicians, they rarely directly answer the question that was asked. They listen to the question that was asked. They interpret it in a way that allows them to tell the story or the point of view that they really want to get across. So when you're thinking about theme, it's pretty open to interpretation. Think about that the next time you have to tell one. One of the rules I mentioned was that it can't be read and it can't be memorized. One person definitely memorized their talk, and it was terrible. It had no emotion. It was wooden. It was tedious. And I just wanted it to be over. It was only 5 minutes. It felt a lot longer. So if you're ever wondering if the upcoming talk you need to give or presentation, if you should memorize it, don't. Know it, learn it, don't memorize it. It's going to make it bad. 5 minutes was a great length of time for these presentations. And what was really great about it was that it gave me a bracket. I knew what I was in for. I knew it was going to be 5 or 6 minutes. So even if I wasn't enjoying it, I knew what to expect, which is way better than being in a presentation or listening to a story and you have no idea when it's going to end. When you have no idea when it's going to end, it feels interminable. Knowing what to expect goes a long way. I also found that having a theme was really helpful. Now, sometimes having a theme helps people know what you're talking about, and sometimes it gets them to pay attention by having them look for how it applies. There were a few talks, and halfway through it, I could not figure out how this story was about Lost. When they came around to explaining why it was or got to that point, it was great. But the whole time I was paying extra close attention because I wanted to see how it applied. And you can do that in work as well. In my talk entitled Leadership Lessons from Left Field, I discuss how using personal stories to teach a business lesson can be very powerful. If people are discussing a problem and you start telling a story from your childhood, people are going to be actively looking for how the two things tie together. When they make that leap of intuition, it lights up their mind like a holiday display. Let's call it that. So those are my observations from the first Moth Storytelling event that I had ever attended. If you want to hear some good stories and then analyze to find out what makes them good, listen to The Moth. You can hear The Moth Story Hour on NPR, or you can get the podcast, and they've got a website with a lot of pretty cool resources, including the game of storytelling, which I just ordered and you can get as well. I've put links to all of these resources in the show notes, so check them out. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this one, you may want to listen to one of the other episodes I mentioned earlier, 12, 34, 42, 47, and 14. And if you know anyone else who loves storytelling or who would like to get better at it or even better at it, let them know about this podcast. Send them to my website, neuroconversantleadership.com, where they can listen to this episode or any of the others. Thanks again and have a great week.